Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through the sources, cut through the noise, and really try to give you the insights you need to be well informed. Today, we're tackling, well, it's possibly our most sobering deep dive yet. We're going to take an unflinching look at the multi-dimensional consequences of a nuclear attack. Our sources give us a really comprehensive assessment of these impacts, and our mission for you is to sort of peel back the layers, look at what happens in a nuclear event, and show how interconnected the repercussions truly are. You'll see pretty quickly, I think, how these effects just dwarf any nation's ability to respond or recover, even from what some people might try to call a, quote, limited exchange. This isn't about, abstract fears. It's about confronting a genuine existential threat that maybe for many is still kind of denied or overlooked.
Exactly. And that's why this conversation is so critical. We need to move past these theoretical ideas and really walk through the actual concrete chains of events, the cascading failures. Our goal here is to show, with, stark clarity, why prevention is the only real strategy. There's no viable alternative when you're talking about a catastrophe on this scale.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this threat, let's start with the weapons themselves. Understanding the tools, right? Our sources break down nuclear weapons into two main types. First, you've got tactical nuclear weapons, TNWs. These are, they're designed for battlefield use, military targets, sometimes even near your own forces. Their power, the yield, it ranges from maybe a fraction of a kiloton up to about 50 kilotons. But here's the thing that really jumps out. Even a 50 kiloton tactical nuke is like setting off dozens of the bombs used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's tactical.
Yeah, the terminology can be really misleading, can it? It really can. And then on the other end, you have strategic nuclear weapons. These are the big ones, built for mass destruction. We're talking cities, industrial centers, major military bases. The yields here are usually from 100 kilotons up to, over a megaton. Much larger.
Huge difference in scale.
And what's really chilling, something our sources point out, is this dangerous idea that the line between tactical and strategic gets incredibly blurry in a real conflict.
Yeah.
And disturbingly, sometimes these TNWs are apparently under less rigid political control. That part seems particularly worrying. What does that imply? That less rigid control? How easily could things spiral?
Oh, that's a critical point. That lack of rigid control, it fundamentally undermines the whole basis of deterrence that we relied on for decades. And what's fascinating is how this connects back, during the Cold War, the main idea was mutual assured destruction, MAD.
MAD.
The whole premise was, terrifyingly simple. If both sides could completely obliterate each other, neither would start a major attack because it meant their own end, too. A balance of terror, essentially.
Exactly. And this led to this massive arms race. Global stockpiles peaked at, over 65,000 warheads in the mid-'80s? Just incredible numbers.
Wow.
Thankfully, that number's come down a lot. It's around 12,500 today, give or take. And about 4,000 of those are ready to go operational.
Still a terrifying number, though.
Absolutely. And MAD, it still heavily influences how strategists think. You could argue maybe that MAD did prevent large-scale war for decades. But our sources also highlight a counter-argument. Current situation. It looks more like an accelerating arms race again, and there's this concerning erosion of the nuclear taboo, that unspoken rule against actually using these things.
Yeah, you hear more talk about it now.
Precisely. And that's reflected in the doomsday clock moving to 90 seconds to midnight in 2023. It signals this heightened danger, which raises an important question. Why does, say, the financial sector seem to have this blind spot about nuclear war risk?
It's almost like
psychological adaptation, denial, maybe just apathy, or accidentally making things more dangerous. It really underscores why eliminating these weapons needs to be seen as urgent, not some far-off goal.
It's hard to square that apathy with the raw reality of what these weapons do. When you picture a nuclear blast, the first thing is usually the explosion itself, right? But the sources make it clear it's not one thing. It's like a four-pronged attack, each part worsening the others. First, you have the sheer force of the blast wave and pressure effects. This incredibly powerful pressure wave, that's the main cause of the physical destruction. Right at ground zero, people are just vaporized instantly. Further out, buildings collapse, debris flies everywhere, causing horrific injuries.
Yeah, the overpressure is immense.
The numbers are stark. A 10 kiloton device, relatively small by today's standards, in a big city. Estimates are 5,000 casualties in the first quarter second. 30,000 within 15 seconds. Up to 100,000 within 24 hours. And in that zone of total destruction, immediate death rates over 90%. The Red Cross summed it up by saying even a single nuclear weapon creates a humanitarian catastrophe that's difficult to cope with.
And difficult to cope with feels like such a massive understatement, doesn't it, given those numbers?
Absolutely.
It just highlights the scale of destruction instantly shatters any hope of a standard emergency response. Hospitals gone or overwhelmed, roads impassable, communications dead. It's immediate, total paralysis.
Total paralysis. And then number 2, you get the thermal radiation. Intense heat, blinding light, and these huge firestorms. We're talking millions of degrees Celsius at the center. Blinding light that causes flash blindness miles away, severe burns over large areas, widespread fires starting simultaneously.
Ignition just everywhere.
Exactly. But the truly apocalyptic part here is the firestorms. These individual fires merge, creating this massive swirling inferno over huge areas. They consume so much oxygen, they produce lethal carbon monoxide, making even underground shelters potentially deadly. And crucially, this is a major trigger for the long-term nuclear winter scenario.
The terrifying feedback.
Then third, there's the initial nuclear radiation. This is that burst of high-energy ionizing radiation right at the moment of detonation. And the key thing here is it's invisible. You can't smell it, can't see it, can't sense it at all, but it causes acute radiation syndrome, ARS, deadly.
The silent killer.
And finally, the fourth prong, electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. This is this huge burst of electromagnetic energy, especially dangerous if a weapon is detonated high up, say 45 miles. That could disrupt electronics over a 1,000-mile diameter. Just think about that.
1,000 miles. Every computer, every phone, traffic lights, power grids, banking systems, potentially fried. Gone. Our sources say it can take years to fix widespread power outages from an EMP. So all 4 blast, heat, initial radiation, EMP, they combine instantly for just overwhelming devastation.
And that EMP piece, that's where the systemic collapse really hits home, right? It's not just about the immediate blast zone. EMP is this system-wide disruptor. It can paralyze modern society's lifelines without causing direct casualties in areas far from the detonation.
The knock-on effects.
Exactly. It's the silent killer of modern life, really. You're looking at a potential dark ages scenario. Loss of digital finance, no credit cards, no ATMs, nothing. Loss of energy-dependent systems, all those interconnected things we rely on every single day. Severed. It makes any kind of organized response totally impossible and basically throws survivors, even those untouched by the blast itself, back into a pre-industrial existence. It's almost impossible to really comprehend that level of immediate cascading failure. And the horror doesn't stop there, does it? Let's shift to the next phase, the sort of insidious, long-lasting threat. Radioactive fallout.
Right, the invisible poison.
Yeah. This is the radioactive material that gets blasted up into the atmosphere and then falls back down. The mechanics are important here. Surface burst, where the fireball actually touches the ground, is much worse for fallout. It sucks up tons of soil and debris, makes it intensely radioactive, and creates way more fallout than an airburst higher up.
Makes sense, yeah. More material drawn in.
Exactly. And where that fallout goes depends on the weapon's yield, the burst height, but critically the weather. Wind speed, wind direction, rain. There's this famous example of the Castle Bravo test. It created this cigar-shaped contamination pattern that stretched over 500 kilometers downwind. Just massive.
Unbelievable spread.
And you also get these hot spots where rain or snow literally washes the radioactive particles out of the air, concentrating them in certain areas. It's inherently unpredictable, which makes it so dangerous.
And that unpredictability is key. Fallout is usually most dangerous in the first few hours after the blast, typically reaching the ground maybe 15 minutes or more after the detonation. Now the good news, if you can call it that, is radiation levels do decrease rapidly. They drop to about 1% of their initial levels within about 2 weeks.
Okay, so there is a decay.
There is. But again, remember, you cannot see it, smell it, or sense it. That's what makes it so insidious. And the real long-term problem comes from isotopes with long half-lives. Things like strontium-90, half-life of 28 years, and cesium-137, half-life of 33 years. Decades. These get into water supplies, into the soil, into the food chain. They contaminate huge areas, making them uninhabitable for generations. Imagine trying to tell your kids, your grandkids, that the park down the street is toxic for their entire lives.
Just awful. So what about protection? Do the sources mention anything?
They do. The principles are distance, shielding, and time. Distance means getting underground or into the core of a large building. Shielding means putting dense material between you and the fallout. Thick concrete, bricks, earth, even stacks of books can help.
Okay.
And time means staying put. Remain sheltered for at least 24 hours, but ideally for 2 weeks. to let those initial levels decay significantly. They also mentioned decontamination, removing outer clothes, washing skin and hair, and only consuming food and water that was sealed and stored indoors beforehand.
Right. Makes sense individually.
And this is the crucial question it raises. How realistic are these individual measures on a mass scale?
Yeah, in total chaos.
Exactly. When society has collapsed, communications are down, millions are dead or dying. Trying to get millions of people to effectively shelter, shield, decontaminate, it's incredibly challenging, if not impossible. It really highlights the limits, maybe the futility of individual preparedness when facing something this catastrophic. Societal breakdown is baked in.
Which brings us to the human cost for those who do survive the initial blast and the immediate fallout. The health consequences are just devastating. A major concern is acute radiation syndrome, ARS radiation sickness basically, caused by getting a high dose of ionizing radiation quickly.
Right, that initial burst or heavy fallout exposure.
ARS has these distinct stages. First, the prodromal stage. Nausea, vomiting, fatigue, starting minutes to days after exposure. Then, weirdly, comes an asymptomatic latent stage. You might feel better for hours or even up to 3 weeks. It's deceptive.
Like the calm before the storm.
Exactly, because then the severe systemic illness stage hits, lasting hours to maybe 60 days, with much worse symptoms depending on the dose. And the dose is measured in grays, right? That's the unit of absorbed radiation.
Correct.
Even 1 gray can make you seriously ill, above 6 gray, usually lethal. It essentially shuts down your body's key systems. You can get severe infections because your bone marrow is destroyed, uncontrollable bleeding, terrible diarrhea leading to dehydration and sepsis. At the highest doses, over 30 gray, it attacks the brain directly. Tremors, seizures, coma, plus headaches, dizziness, hair loss, internal bleeding. It's horrific.
And this is where, the medical reality meets the sheer scale of the disaster. The key insight isn't just that people get sick with ARS. It's that the medical system required to even attempt treatment will be gone, our sources stated plainly. The sheer volume of casualties would overwhelm any nation's medical response capacity.
No hospitals, no doctors.
Exactly. Hospitals destroyed or swamped, staff dead or injured, no power for equipment, no supplies. So ARS, which might be treatable in an isolated industrial accident, becomes a mass fatality event. Millions suffering and dying with absolutely no medical help. As the sources say grimly, there is no possible cure after the catastrophe has occurred. It's palliative care at best, if anything.
And even for those who survive ARS or receive lower doses, the long-term health effects are profound. We have the tragic example of the Hibakusha, the survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Their experiences taught us so much, tragically.
We see significantly increased cancer rates. Leukemia spiked noticeably about 5-6 years after the bombings. Then, after about a decade, higher rates of thyroid, breast, lung, other solid cancers emerged. The sources mentioned that roughly 1 in 40 people exposed to 1 gray will develop a radiation-induced cancer on top of their normal lifetime risk.
A significant increase.
And then there are the in utero effects. Pregnant women exposed faced higher risks of miscarriage and infant death. Their children had higher rates of intellectual disability, developmental delays, and again, increased cancer risk later in life. One statistic was particularly shocking. A 1 gray dose in the first trimester could potentially raise a child's lifetime fatal cancer risk from the normal 25% all the way up to 100%.
Just devastating for families.
And other chronic issues too, like cataracts developing sometimes months, sometimes decades later.
Yeah, and building on that, what's interesting and quite complex is that while animal studies showed clear genetic damage passed down, human studies of the children born to Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors who could still reproduce didn't find a statistically significant increase in birth defects.
Oh, really? That is surprising.
It is. It highlights how complex these long-term genetic effects are in humans. But that doesn't really lessen the overall burden. These long-term health problems, many invisible, create this constant weight on survivors and their families. The fear of what might develop, the chronic illnesses, it leads to enormous psychological stress, social stigma sometimes. It just compounds the initial trauma, creating this lasting legacy of suffering that, frankly, no society is equipped to handle on a large scale.
So after walking through all this deep dive leads us to a really stark, inescapable conclusion, doesn't it? A nuclear attack, it doesn't matter if you call it tactical or strategic, it just unleashes this chain reaction of catastrophic, interconnected consequences. And they are utterly beyond any realistic capacity for response or recovery.
Completely overwhelming.
The immediate destruction, the blast, the heat, the initial radiation, the EMP that just sets the stage for these pervasive, insidious long-term effects. Land poisoned by fallout for decades, widespread, untreatable sickness because the entire medical system is gone. It's almost impossible to truly grasp that scale, isn't it?
It really is. And this raises, I think, the most important question. This idea, this illusion of a limited nuclear war is just incredibly dangerous. It's a fallacy. Our whole exploration today confirms that any use of a nuclear weapon carries this uncontrollable risk of escalating into a global catastrophe.
Prevention is the only way.
It's the only viable strategy. There is no coping with this. There's only preventing it. So perhaps the provocative thought to leave you with is this. What does it actually mean for us to live in a world where humanity holds the power for its own annihilation, and not only holds it, but actively invests in it? And maybe more personally, what is your role? What is our role in acknowledging that reality and advocating for the only real solution we have? A genuine global commitment to nuclear disarmament.